The towering glass and steel skyscrapers of Wall Street cast long, imposing shadows over the bustling financial district on that humid, unforgiving late afternoon. Valerie stepped out of the massive corporate building, her shoulders slumped beneath the heavy burden of sheer exhaustion. She dragged her aching feet across the uneven pavement, feeling every single hour of her grueling 12-hour shift in her bones. Her standard, faded blue cleaning uniform clung to her damp back, soaked in sweat from a day of relentless labor. At 28 years old, her body constantly complained as if she were an elderly woman of 70. She had scrubbed over 20 executive suites that day, wiped countless dried, sticky coffee rings off expensive mahogany desks, sanitized pristine marble bathrooms, and polished endless smudge-covered windows, until her arms went entirely numb. She wanted nothing more than to catch her crowded bus back to her tiny apartment in East New York, eat a simple, lonely plate of rice and beans, and collapse into her narrow bed. Suddenly, cutting through the overwhelming, chaotic noise of the restless city traffic, the blaring horns and the shouting pedestrians, she heard a faint, muffled crying sound. Valerie stopped dead in her tracks, her weary eyes scanning the heavily crowded sidewalk. Just across the busy intersection, amidst a sea of dark business suits and briefcases, two identical little girls were wandering aimlessly, clutching each other's hands with terrifying desperation. They had bright blonde hair tied carefully with elegant white ribbons, shiny patent leather shoes that caught the fading sunlight, and beautiful, intricate dresses that likely cost more than Valerie earned in an entire month of scrubbing floors. Their rosy, delicate cheeks were soaked with heavy, continuous tears. She looked frantically left and right, desperately searching for a distressed mother, a panicked nanny, or any responsible adult who might be looking for them. There was absolutely no one. Two 5-year-old children were completely abandoned in the middle of the chaotic, unforgiving financial district. Valerie's chest tightened with such a fierce, instinctual protective urge that she did not even pause to consider her own safety. She dashed across the perilous avenue, ignoring a furious delivery driver on a bicycle who swerved sharply and shouted nasty curses at her. She reached the trembling children and immediately dropped to her bruised knees on the dirty, gum-stained concrete, bringing herself down to their eye level. "Hey, sweethearts, please do not cry. Breathe. Nobody is going to hurt you here," she murmured with a soothing, melodic voice, pushing a stray lock of hair from her sweaty forehead. "Can you tell me what happened?" The little girl in the yellow dress swallowed a hard, painful sob, while the one in the red dress squeezed her sister's tiny hand even more defensively. "We lost our daddy," the first one whispered, her voice barely audible over the roaring traffic. "He told us to stay perfectly still." The second girl chimed in, wiping her running nose with the back of her hand. "We only walked away for one tiny minute because we saw a pretty pigeon." Valerie gently wiped a fresh tear from the cheek of the girl in yellow. Her rough, calloused hand, worn out and dried by harsh chemical detergents, felt impossibly large and rough against that delicate, porcelain face. "We are not supposed to talk to strangers," the girl in red grumbled suddenly, puffing out her chest and trying to look incredibly brave and fierce despite her red, swollen eyes. Valerie almost let out a tired, genuine chuckle despite the incredibly tense situation. "Is that right? Well, that is a very smart rule, but I am a helper. My name is Valerie. What are your beautiful names?" The crying girl pointed a trembling finger at her brave sister. "I am Vanessa, and she is Ashley, and I am not crying anymore." Ashley hesitated for a long, calculating moment, staring deeply into the eyes of the exhausted cleaning lady, but her tough facade finally softened. Valerie extended both her open, empty hands, and the little twins tightly grasped her fingers, anchoring themselves to her warmth. Just down the busy block stood an old-fashioned street vendor roasting warm, honey-glazed peanuts, the sweet and salty aroma fighting its way through the thick scent of city exhaust. Valerie gently guided the little ones toward the cart. "Sir, I will take 3 bags, please," she requested softly, reaching into her deep uniform pocket. The elderly vendor, a kind man with deep wrinkles, smiled warmly as he noticed the tear-stained faces of the little girls, and he filled the brown paper bags incredibly generously. Valerie paid with her meager dinner money without a single second thought. They sat together on the cold, imposing marble steps of a luxury investment bank. It was an incredibly odd, striking sight. A tired woman in a faded, stained blue uniform, sitting shoulder to shoulder, with two angelic girls in high-end designer outfits, sharing cheap street food as the wealthy executives rushed past them. "Careful, it is still very hot," Ashley warned her sister, poking the roasted peanuts tentatively with her index finger. Vanessa had already shoved a massive handful into her mouth, chewing happily, the salt mixing with her drying tears. "Your father probably does not let you eat street food, does he?" Valerie asked carefully, blowing on her own handful to cool them down. "He says it is terrible for our tummies and full of germs," Ashley replied with a serious, grown-up tone that did not fit her tiny face. "But today is a special day," Vanessa smiled brightly, a huge, peanut-filled grin, and then she rested her little blonde head gently against Valerie's tired shoulder, as if she had known this woman for her entire life. Valerie froze completely. Her weary, aching shoulder, accustomed only to the heavy weight of industrial mops and buckets of dirty water, now supported a precious, trusting child. Her hand instinctively moved to stroke the girl's soft hair. From across the broad, congested avenue, a desperate, agonizing shout echoed over the endless traffic, slicing through the ambient noise like a sharp knife. "Vanessa! Ashley!" The three of them snapped their heads up simultaneously. A tall, distinguished man in an exquisitely tailored, charcoal-gray suit was sprinting frantically toward them. His expensive jacket was completely unbuttoned. His silk tie was thrown haphazardly over his shoulder, and his graying temples were wild with sweat. His eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated terror. Ashley gasped and dropped her warm bag of peanuts onto the dirty sidewalk. "It is Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. Vanessa instantly grabbed Valerie's arm with astonishing strength, burying her face deep into the blue uniform. "I do not want to go," she cried, clinging to the cleaning lady as if her life depended on it. Franklin Buchanan arrived completely breathless, having narrowly avoided getting hit by a speeding yellow taxi that honked furiously and swerved out of his path. He barely registered the deadly danger. His frantic, bloodshot eyes were glued entirely to his two daughters sitting on the gritty pavement, eating cheap street peanuts next to a stranger in a blue cleaning uniform. His overwhelming, paralyzing relief violently mutated into blind, irrational rage in a fraction of a second. He aggressively grabbed Ashley's tiny arm, hauling her slightly upward. "Get away from them! Right this instant!" His voice cracked, a low, menacing growl that carried far more deep-seated pain than actual authority. Valerie stood up immediately, her protective instincts overriding any fear of the wealthy, imposing man. Her hand instinctively moved to shield Vanessa, who absolutely refused to let go of her leg. "Lower your voice, sir," Valerie commanded firmly, her dark eyes locking onto his. "I am not speaking to you," Franklin snapped fiercely, barely giving her a glance. "Well, I am speaking to you," Valerie shot back, without missing a beat. These little girls were wandering completely alone, crying their eyes out on the sidewalk in the middle of this massive city. "You are scaring them. Let go of her arm." Vanessa began to wail loudly, the sound echoing off the stone buildings. Ashley pushed her father's gripping hand away with all her might. "Stop it, Daddy," she shouted, showing him the faint red mark his desperate, tight grip had left on her pale skin. Franklin blinked rapidly, stumbling backward half a step, as if he had been physically struck by a heavy blow. "Sweetheart, I did not mean—" He stared down at his own trembling hands, utterly horrified by his sudden loss of control. "We looked everywhere for you, Daddy," Ashley said, her tiny voice shaking with leftover adrenaline and fear. "You were nowhere. We went to the lobby and you were gone. You are always in a meeting." The heavy, Innocent words hit Franklin right in the chest, stealing the breath from his lungs. He froze completely on the crowded sidewalk. Pedestrians continued to rush past them in a blurry stream, some glaring judgmentally, but most completely ignoring the wealthy executive breaking down emotionally on the pavement. Valerie took a deep, steadying breath, knowing she could not just abandon these incredibly frightened children to a man currently ruled by panic. "Mister, can I say something to you?" Valerie asked softly, her tone shifting from defensive to gently reprimanding. Franklin finally looked at her, truly noticing the tired woman with messy dark hair, hastily tied back, chipped fingernails, and a uniform stained with harsh chemicals. "You were terrified. I know that. I would be terrified too if I lost them. But do not yell at them. They are already scared to death." Overcome with immense guilt, Franklin dropped heavily to his knees, right on the greasy, dirty concrete of Wall Street. His pristine, custom-made linen suit brushed the city filth, but he did not care in the slightest. "I am so sorry, my beautiful angels. Daddy was so wrong to yell. I was just so afraid." He extended his trembling fingers toward Vanessa, who was still hiding behind Valerie's leg. "Thank you," Franklin said dryly to Valerie, struggling to regain his composed corporate demeanor as he stood back up. "I appreciate your help. I will take it from here." Valerie crouched down carefully to say a proper, gentle goodbye to the little girls, gently stroking Vanessa's hair and tucking a loose, silky strand behind Ashley's ear. "Go with your father, sweethearts. He loves you very much and he was just very worried," she whispered kindly. "You have to come with us," Vanessa pleaded, her voice breaking into another sob. "I cannot, my sweet girl. I have to go to my own home now." Suddenly, the twins let go of their father entirely, sprinted back to Valerie, and hugged her legs so fiercely they nearly knocked her over. "Mommy, do not leave us. Please stay, Mommy," they screamed together, their voices echoing off the surrounding glass facades. A busy businesswoman, in a sleek black suit, stopped dead in her tracks, lowering her cell phone. A young delivery boy on a sleek bicycle hit his brakes hard just to stare at the unfolding drama. Valerie stood utterly paralyzed, her hands hovering awkwardly in the mid-air. She desperately wanted to yell to the crowd that she had absolutely not taught them that sacred word, that she was just a tired office cleaner on her way home. She looked at Franklin in pure, unadulterated panic, silently begging for his intervention. Franklin was as pale as a fresh sheet of paper. His mouth hung slightly open, his jaw slack, as he stared intently at his daughters, holding a total stranger, and calling her the one specific word that had been strictly forbidden and unspoken in his household for 5 agonizing, silent years. The word hung heavily in the humid evening air, like a massive storm cloud waiting to burst. Franklin swallowed hard, his throat completely dry and tight. "Girls, please, come with Daddy right now." His voice was barely a whisper. Ashley pressed her tear-stained face harder against Valerie's worn uniform, refusing to acknowledge him. They were not throwing a simple, childish tantrum. This was a desperate, primal plea for maternal warmth. Valerie looked down at the sobbing children, then back at the completely shattered billionaire standing before her. "Sir, if I try to walk away right now, they are going to run straight into the street after me," she pointed out sensibly, stating the terrifying fact. Franklin slowly stood up straight, dusting off his ruined, expensive trousers. "Would you accept a ride home?" he offered quietly, utterly defeated. Valerie glanced up at the large street clock mounted on the corner bank. It was past 7 o'clock in the evening. Her regular bus was long gone, and catching the next series of trains would mean arriving in her dangerous neighborhood in East New York close to midnight. Her frail, sickly mother would be waiting up, sick with worry. "Just until they calm down," Valerie agreed cautiously, not wanting to overstep. The luxurious, elongated black town car pulled up seamlessly to the curb. A sharply dressed chauffeur, in a crisp uniform, opened the heavy, armored door. Vanessa climbed in first, pulling Valerie tightly by the hand. Inside, It smelled richly of expensive leather and fresh, cool air conditioning that sent a shiver down Valerie's sweaty spine. The grand car seamlessly pulled away from the curb, leaving the financial district behind and heading toward the unbelievably wealthy Upper East Side. Both girls fell deeply asleep within a matter of minutes, their heavy heads resting securely on Valerie's soft shoulders, exhausted by their terrifying adventure. Through the rearview mirror, Valerie caught a glimpse of Franklin, sitting rigidly in the front passenger seat. He was staring out the window, but the glass reflected his face perfectly. She watched him quickly wipe away a solitary, heavy tear before composing himself. As they finally arrived at a magnificent, towering mansion that looked like a historic European palace, the massive wrought iron gates silently glided open. Franklin carefully carried the sleeping Vanessa, covering her delicate arms with his ruined linen jacket, while Valerie surprisingly found the strength to carry Ashley, an older woman with incredibly kind eyes, graying hair, and a pristine white apron, rushed out the massive front door, clutching her chest. "Mr. Buchanan, thank the heavens. I was just about to dial the police," Eleanor the housekeeper gasped, her voice shaking. "They are perfectly safe, Eleanor. They are just sleeping soundly," Franklin whispered, stepping into the grand foyer. Eleanor's eyes widened dramatically as she saw Valerie, a woman in a stained cleaning uniform, carrying the other twin. After carefully putting the children to bed, in a massive bedroom painted entirely in soft pink hues and filled with untouched toys, Franklin invited Valerie down to the massive, incredibly intimidating living room. He offered her a formal position as a live-in nanny and governess with triple her current cleaning salary, free room and board, and her Sundays completely off. Valerie sat on the edge of a sofa that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. Thinking of her mother Alice's expensive, necessary diabetes medications and their constantly delayed rent payments, she boldly accepted under one strict, non-negotiable condition. He must never ever yell at her the way he did on the street, and she would raise the girls with joy, dirt, and laughter, not strict, cold discipline. During her first long week, Valerie quickly realized the massive house was operated exactly like a cold, emotionless military barracks. Everyone ate their meals separately. The staff whispered. No one ever laughed out loud. By the second week, she decided it was time to break absolutely every unspoken rule this house had. "Today, we eat breakfast in our pajamas," she announced brightly one morning. The twins hesitated, looking nervously toward the doorway, but the glorious sight of thick chocolate milk poured generously over fluffy pancakes completely won them over. Franklin marched into the huge marble kitchen, a sleek phone pressed tightly to his ear, arguing aggressively about international stocks in London. He stopped dead in his tracks. His daughters were sitting casually on the kitchen counter, their bare feet dangling happily, with huge, messy chocolate mustaches painted on their smiling faces. Franklin hung up the phone abruptly, completely ignoring the foreign investor on the other end. "Good morning," he managed to say, completely bewildered. "Look, Daddy, Mommy Valerie made us wonderful chocolate mustaches." Vanessa cheered, pointing to her face. Franklin stared, entirely unsure how to handle this sudden burst of chaotic, messy joy in his perfectly ordered life. Later that same evening, he returned home from the office to find them sprawled comfortably on a $30,000 imported Persian rug, their cheap, colorful crayons scattered everywhere. "Look at our beautiful drawing, Daddy," Ashley said proudly, holding up a piece of paper. "This is our family. The mommy with the blue apron is Mommy Valerie, because our real mommy became a bright star in the sky a long time ago." Franklin slowly descended to the floor, completely ruining the sharp crease in his designer suit, and picked up a red crayon to join them. Eleanor watched silently from the kitchen doorway, pressing a clean dish towel firmly to her mouth to hide her emotional, overwhelming tears. "That stubborn man has not sat on that living room rug in 5 long years," she whispered to Valerie, who was gently warming up a pot of milk on the expensive stove. "I am just here to do my job, Eleanor. and care for these sweet girls," Valerie replied modestly, stirring the milk. But she knew deep down in her heart that something profound and irreversible was shifting within the massive stone walls of the mansion. The following morning, however, the fragile, newly found peace was violently shattered by the sharp, incredibly aggressive clicking of high heels echoing across the polished marble foyer. Amanda, Franklin's young and exceedingly arrogant fiancée, stormed directly into the kitchen without knocking. She wore a tight, beige designer dress that left nothing to the imagination, and carried a handbag worth a small fortune. Her heavily made-up eyes scanned the room in disgust, landing directly on Valerie and the little girls, who were happily covered head to toe in white baking flour, making messy, heart-shaped cookies. "Good heavens!" Amanda sneered, wrinkling her perfect nose. "Are you the new incompetent help? Children of this high social standing absolutely do not roll around in the kitchen filth like common street urchins. Go up to your rooms immediately, girls. The maid will clean this disaster up." Vanessa's bottom lip began to quiver terribly, and Ashley stubbornly gripped her wooden mixing spoon tightly, refusing to move an inch. "They are making lovely cookies, ma'am. They are having fun, and they will wash up just fine before lunch," Valerie stated calmly, wiping her flour-covered hands deliberately on her apron, standing her ground. Amanda narrowed her cold eyes, stepping dangerously close to Valerie's personal space. "Do not ever speak back to me, you ignorant, uneducated woman. You are nothing but a servant here." Franklin suddenly appeared in the grand doorway, drawn from his home office by the loud commotion. "What exactly is going on in here?" he demanded strictly. Amanda instantly put on a flawless, victimized face, her tone shifting to a sweet whine. "Your new employee is encouraging blatant defiance, Franklin darling. The house is an absolute, unbearable disaster." Ashley, however, marched right up to her towering father and bravely rolled up her tiny pajama sleeve, pointing a small finger to an old, fading yellowish bruise on her upper arm. "She grabbed my arm really hard the last time she was here, Daddy," Ashley declared boldly, her voice echoing in the silent kitchen. "She told me that you would be furious with me and send me away if I ever told you." Franklin's handsome face instantly drained of all its color, turning completely white. He slowly looked at Amanda, whose confident, arrogant smirk faltered for a mere fraction of a second before she recovered. "Franklin, surely you are not going to believe a dramatic child's wild imagination over your future wife, are you?" Amanda scoffed nervously, waving her hand dismissively. Franklin's jaw clenched so tight, a prominent muscle ticked visibly in his cheek. "Valerie, please finish baking the cookies with my wonderful daughters," he instructed, with a voice as cold as absolute ice. "Amanda, step into my private office. Right this second." The heavy mahogany door down the hall slammed shut with a deafening thud. The furious, muffled shouting from the private office vibrated aggressively through the thick mansion walls for nearly an hour. Amanda cried loudly, played the innocent victim perfectly, and swore repeatedly that the young child was simply lying for attention. Franklin did not officially end the engagement on that exact day, but a massive, entirely irreparable crack had formed in their strained relationship. He immediately stopped dining out at fancy, exclusive restaurants with her, canceled their upcoming weekend charity galas, and started coming home precisely at 5 o'clock in the afternoon every single weekday. He even canceled vital executive board meetings, just to sit on the floor and build massive wooden block castles with the twins, constantly seeking Valerie's warm, encouraging, and genuine smile from across the expansive room. One rainy, dreary Tuesday evening, Valerie was warmly tucking the girls into their comfortable beds, telling them an old, fascinating folktale her mother Alice used to tell her back in their small apartment in East New York. Franklin lingered quietly in the dim hallway, leaning against the wall, listening intently to her melodic voice, mimicking the howling wind and the brave heroes. When the magical story finally finished, he slowly walked into the cozy room. "Can I try telling one tonight?" he asked hesitantly, looking almost shy. He sat gently on the edge of the mattress, awkwardly loosening his expensive silk tie. He told a clumsy, incredibly sweet story about a terribly lost truck driver who found two beautiful magical princesses abandoned on a dark, scary road. And the sad driver realized he had completely forgotten how to smile. Franklin murmured softly, his deep voice thick with heavy, unwept tears, until those brave princesses and a remarkably kind lady wearing a blue uniform taught his heart how to beat again. Ashley reached out her tiny, warm hand and gently wiped a stray, rogue teardrop from her father's weary, lined face. Valerie slipped out of the quiet room silently, not wanting to intrude on this deeply personal healing, retreating to the massive kitchen where Eleanor was meticulously polishing the silver cutlery. "I think I need to pack my bags and quit, Eleanor," Valerie whispered, her hands trembling violently as she poured a glass of water. "I am just a cleaner. He is a billionaire with a vengeful fiancée. I am completely out of my depth here." Eleanor gently placed her soft polishing cloth down on the counter and took Valerie's trembling hands firmly in hers. "My dear, sweet girl, I have worked faithfully in this imposing house for 17 years. That stubborn man never spoke a single word of genuine affection to anyone, not even himself, until you walked bravely through that front door. You are not out of your depth. You are exactly the miracle they needed." Taking the older woman's wise advice, Valerie decided to stay. That sunny Saturday, Franklin handed Valerie his unlimited platinum credit card and specifically asked her to take the growing girls to a luxury shopping mall on Fifth Avenue to buy appropriate, comfortable shoes for the upcoming school semester, trusting her completely. The young girls were happily skipping down the pristine, shining marble corridors of the elite shopping center when the aggressive, familiar clicking of stiletto heels announced incoming trouble. Amanda, flanked by three of her equally wealthy, heavily perfumed and judgmental friends, deliberately blocked their path. "Well, well, what a tragic, unfortunate coincidence," Amanda mocked loudly, crossing her thin arms over her chest. "Girls, come give your future stepmother a proper kiss." The twins firmly planted their feet on the ground and quickly hid behind Valerie's protective legs. Amanda's shallow friends whispered loudly to one another, pointing and blatantly mocking Valerie's simple, inexpensive clothing and her unstyled, natural hair. Valerie took a deep, calming breath, determined to remain utterly professional and protect the innocent children from this venomous public display. "Excuse us, ma'am. We need to get to the shoe store right away," Valerie said politely but firmly, trying her best to step around the intimidating group. Amanda maliciously reached out and grabbed Ashley's wrist, tightly. "I said, come here to me." Valerie's voice instantly dropped an octave, resonating with a fierce, motherly authority that surprised even herself. "Let go of her arm right this absolute minute." Amanda's arrogant friends actually took a physical step back, genuinely surprised and intimidated by the commanding, powerful tone. Amanda reluctantly released the child, but sneered viciously. "Franklin told me just last night that he is completely exhausted by you. He deeply regrets hiring a nobody from the dirty slums." Before Valerie could even process the cruel, biting words, Ashley stepped forward and shouted, "You are a massive, terrible liar. Daddy said on the phone to his brother last night that Mommy Valerie is the absolute best thing that ever happened to us. I saw you hiding and listening outside the kitchen door like a sneaky, bad rat," Ashley proclaimed loudly, her voice carrying down the entire luxury wing of the mall. Amanda flushed bright, furious crimson red, as her judgmental, gossiping friends stared at her in utter embarrassment and shock. Murmuring awkward, hasty excuses, the fake friends quickly scurried away toward the descending escalators, leaving Amanda deeply humiliated and utterly alone in the middle of the concourse. "You will pay dearly for this, you peasant," Amanda hissed venomously before storming off in the opposite direction. Valerie held her head incredibly high, grabbed the girls' hands gently, and guided them safely to the waiting town car to head back to the sanctuary of their home. When they finally returned to the grand Upper East Side estate, A highly shocking, tense scene awaited them. 3 enormous, wildly expensive designer suitcases were piled high in the direct center of the living room rug. Amanda sat stiffly on the velvet sofa, furiously tapping on her expensive phone, acting as if nothing embarrassing had occurred at the mall. Franklin stood rigidly by the towering floor-to-ceiling window, staring blankly out at the manicured garden. Eleanor, sensing the thick tension, quickly ushered the young twins into the kitchen to make fresh, cold lemonade, keeping them far away from the brewing, inevitable storm. Valerie stood quietly near the mountain of luggage, her heart pounding heavily and erratically against her ribs, waiting for the verdict. "Well, your little incompetent employee has finally arrived," Amanda spat venomously, without even bothering to look up from her glowing screen. Franklin turned around slowly, his face an unreadable, stoic mask. "Are these your packed bags, Amanda?" She stood up abruptly, tossing her phone carelessly onto the velvet cushions. "Yes, they absolutely are. And I am leaving this ridiculous house right now, unless you fire this miserable, interfering woman directly to her face while I watch. Then, and only then, we can proceed with our planned winter wedding." The antique wooden grandfather clock ticked loudly in the suffocating, heavy silence of the massive room. Franklin looked deeply at Valerie, who stood tall, proud, and completely silent, and then he turned his cold, uncompromising gaze back to his furious fiancée. "Valerie is staying right here," he stated with absolute, unwavering finality. Amanda let out a shrill, piercing, disbelieving laugh that echoed unpleasantly off the high ceilings. "You are honestly choosing a common, uneducated maid over me? A woman of my standing? I will utterly ruin your reputation in the local press. I will destroy you." Franklin remained entirely unfazed by her desperate threats. "My precious daughters are finally happy. They sleep peacefully through the night, without waking up screaming from terrible, haunting nightmares. They sing cheerful, silly songs at the breakfast table every morning. Furthermore, you purposefully bruised my beautiful daughter's arm, and I will absolutely never, ever forgive that as long as I live. Get out of my house this instant." Amanda's perfectly contoured face contorted with pure, unadulterated hatred. She snatched her designer handbag and marched furiously toward the heavy front door, stopping just briefly to glare daggers at Valerie. "He will throw you away too, you pathetic fool," she sneered bitterly. After the heavy, solid oak door slammed shut behind Amanda, echoing through the empty halls, Franklin let out a incredibly long, shuddering breath, running a hand through his graying hair. "You did not have to do that drastic thing just for me," Valerie said softly, her hands nervously smoothing the fabric of her apron. "I did it for my wonderful daughters," Franklin replied softly, walking slowly across the room toward her. "But I also did it for myself, Valerie. I finally sleep peacefully, knowing you are safe under this roof." 2 little blonde heads suddenly peeked curiously around the hallway corner. "Is the mean, scary lady gone forever and ever?" Vanessa asked hopefully, her big eyes wide. "Yes, my sweet girl, forever and ever," Franklin smiled warmly. The girls ran at full speed and hugged them both tightly, their little arms wrapping around their legs in pure, unbridled happiness. In the following wonderful months, the massive, once imposing mansion transformed completely from a cold fortress into a genuine, warm home. There were brightly colored, noisy toys scattered happily across the incredibly expensive Persian carpets, and joyful, messy finger paintings were proudly displayed on the stainless steel refrigerator door, held up by cheap magnets. They even welcomed a chaotic new family member, a scruffy, completely untrained, abandoned stray dog that Valerie found shivering terribly near a cold subway station in the city. They enthusiastically named him Peanut. Franklin initially protested the loud, shedding animal, but when Peanut happily chewed up his incredibly expensive, custom Italian loafers, Franklin just laughed out loud, rubbed the dog's belly, and bought him a luxurious, personalized leather collar. To further help with their growing studies and activities, they hired a cheerful, incredibly patient young tutor named Mr. Harrison, adding even more vibrant life to the bustling home. Valerie's hard-working mother, Alice, also flourished in this new, supportive environment. Thanks to Franklin silently arranging and paying for the absolute finest medical specialists in the entire city, Alice's failing health improved drastically within weeks. She began taking a comfortable cab from East New York every single Sunday to cook massive, fragrant pots of traditional, hearty stew for the entire household staff and family. She even became incredibly close friends with Mrs. Jenkins, a wealthy but deeply lonely elderly neighbor who absolutely adored Alice's incredible cooking and her sharp, witty sense of humor. The rigid, cold, unforgiving walls of the billionaire's fortress had completely melted away, replaced entirely by the warm, chaotic, and beautiful energy of a truly blended, loving family that cared deeply for one another, regardless of their vastly different backgrounds. Late one breezy, comfortable Thursday afternoon, Valerie was quietly hanging the twins' freshly washed, bright school uniforms on a simple clothesline in the sprawling backyard garden, enjoying the fresh air. Franklin walked out onto the stone patio, his dress shirt sleeves rolled up casually and his formal tie missing entirely. "Allow me to assist you with that," he offered charmingly, grabbing a wet shirt. Valerie laughed out loud, a rich, musical sound. "A famous billionaire hanging wet laundry? You will clip the shirts entirely wrong and ruin the fabric." He grabbed a wooden peg and deliberately, playfully pinned a pink shirt entirely upside down, making her giggle again. As their hands accidentally brushed against each other on the thin clothesline, the playful, light atmosphere suddenly shifted into a profound, heavily charged silence between them, the air thick with unspoken emotion. They sat down together on an old, weathered stone bench beneath a massive, blooming cherry tree that showered them with soft pink petals. "I really need to tell you about Jessica, their lovely mother," Franklin started quietly, staring at his hands. "We met when we were merely 25. She was a brilliant pediatric dentist, always giving completely free care to poor children who had absolutely nothing. When we tragically lost her during the complicated childbirth, a massive, irreplaceable part of my soul died right alongside her. Looking at the newborn twins was pure agony, because they looked exactly like her. I became a walking ghost. I foolishly thought throwing endless money at fancy nannies made me a capable, good father. But I was terribly, horribly wrong." He looked deeply and earnestly into Valerie's wide, dark eyes. "You brought the glorious sunlight back into this dark, depressing tomb, Valerie. You brought my precious children back to life, and you miraculously saved me from my own grief. I do not want you here just as a hired nanny anymore. I desperately want you here as my equal partner in life." Valerie's eyes quickly filled with joyful, overwhelming tears. "I do not know how to attend fancy high society galas, Franklin. The other wealthy, snobby mothers will gossip terribly about us." Franklin gently cupped her warm face with his large hands. "Let them gossip all they want. I only care about you and our happiness." He leaned in slowly and kissed her incredibly tenderly under the falling petals. Behind the thick rose bushes, the young twins giggled loudly, holding their tiny hands over their mouths in pure delight. 8 beautiful, transformative months drifted by like a wonderful, healing dream. The mansion was practically unrecognizable to absolutely anyone who had known the old, depressed Franklin. Now there was the constant, delightful, mouth-watering smell of freshly baked vanilla cupcakes wafting from the huge kitchen 3 times a week, as Eleanor patiently taught the young girls how to carefully measure white flour and loudly crack eggs without making too much of a mess. The expensive backyard was a chaotic, joyful playground for Peanut, the highly energetic rescue dog, who spent his happy days chasing bright butterflies and digging small, muddy holes near the perfectly manicured flower beds, much to the loud exasperation of Benjamin, the dedicated head gardener, who secretly loved feeding the silly dog expensive treats anyway. On a spectacularly sunny Saturday afternoon, the sprawling green garden was beautifully decorated with bright, floating balloons and colorful paper streamers for the twins' highly anticipated 6th birthday party. It was absolutely not an extravagant, overly catered, stiff affair with hundreds of wealthy, fake strangers. Instead, it was an intimate, joyful, perfectly chaotic gathering. Alice was there, sitting in a comfortable lawn chair, chatting happily and laughing loudly with Eleanor and the sweet neighbor Mrs. Jenkins. Franklin's previously estranged younger brother, Richard, had even flown in from across the entire country, finally reconnecting with his family after years of bitter silence. Suddenly, Peanut dashed wildly across the lush green lawn with a huge chocolate-frosted cupcake directly in his mouth, the twins chasing wildly after him, shrieking with pure, unadulterated delight. Franklin sat comfortably on a rustic wooden chair beneath the grand old oak tree, watching the chaotic, beautiful, perfect scene unfold before his eyes. His chest swelled with a profound, completely overwhelming sense of pure gratitude that he had never felt before in his entire life. Valerie walked over, slightly out of breath and flushed from playfully chasing the dog, and sat gracefully on the soft, cool grass directly beside his chair. "That crazy, wonderful animal is going to give me a heart attack one day," she laughed brightly, leaning her head affectionately against his knee. Franklin gently stroked her dark, silky hair, completely indifferent to the extremely expensive fabric of his tailored trousers getting wrinkled and stained by the outdoor grass and dirt. "Valerie, my beautiful love," Franklin said softly, his deep voice trembling slightly with genuine, nervous anticipation. "I have a very, very important question to ask you right now." He reached deep into his suit jacket pocket and pulled out a small, slightly worn, antique velvet box. It was absolutely not a massive, flashy new diamond purchased from Fifth Avenue. "This precious ring belonged to my beloved grandmother," he explained softly, carefully opening the tiny lid to reveal a remarkably simple, elegant gold band, set with a modest, slightly faded blue sapphire. "My hard-working grandfather gave it to her, when he was just a poor, struggling milk delivery boy in the city. It is the absolute most valuable thing my entire family owns." Valerie is overwhelmed with joy when Franklin proposes, asking her to become both his wife and the loving mother his daughters already see in her. Encouraged by Vanessa and Ashley, she happily accepts, and as Franklin places the heirloom ring on her finger, family and friends celebrate the emotional moment. Nearby, the loyal chauffeur Oliver quietly honors Jessica's memory, comforted by knowing the girls are now surrounded by love and security. Their story proves that true wealth is found not in money or status, but in compassion, kindness, and selfless devotion. Valerie's unconditional love transforms strangers into family, and a lonely house into a real home, showing that patience, sacrifice, and everyday acts of care can heal deep wounds. By offering hope and support to others, people often discover that the love they give returns to them, bringing lasting happiness and healing.